pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Sue, roll call, please.
Commissioner Cadwalder.
Here.
Commissioner Chambers.
Here.
Commissioner Zanstra.
Here.
Commissioner Gerard is absent tonight. Commissioner Salzweedl.
Here.
Commissioner Thielander.
Here.
And Chair Barker.
Here. Do I have a motion for the approval of the agenda?
I'll make the motion to excuse Commissioner Gerard from the meeting tonight.
Second that.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
So done. Do I have an approval for the agenda?
Motion to approve.
And support? And discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The agenda is set. And do I have an approval for the minutes of the April 10th regular meeting?
I'll make a motion to approve them.
And support?
I'll second.
And discussion? All in favor of accepting the minutes of April 10th as written, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, same sign. Thank you. There is no public. So the old business would be number 5, the zoning ordinance revisions, and we got the finalized copy of chapter 4. And unless there is any real division here on chapter 4, I think what we will do is just accept it as is. We still will have to hold a public hearing, and again, our goal so far is to do chapter 4 and 17 as one public hearing. Mm-hmm. So I think what we're going to end up doing right now is just kind of putting this on the shelf until that hearing. Fair enough?
Yep.
Okay. Then the next one would be the zoning ordinance revisions for chapter 17. And I think I'd like Andy to just walk us through that, please.
I provided to you for this meeting some kind of a red line version of all of the specific special land use standards in chapter 17. If you recall, at some previous meetings, I walked through a bunch of suggested changes I had for all the procedural stuff, which is really everything in section 17.02, items A through L, which goes on to the 3rd page of that packet S, and I didn't make any further changes to there. And you'll also see that I took out all of the changes so you can sort of read what the cleanly formatted procedure is. It's not a substantive change as far as what we currently do. We follow this procedure already, but it spells it out a little bit more clearly for the Planning Commission and for the public and applicants. So unless there are questions on those, Mr. Chairman, I will kind of skip ahead here to to section, primarily starting at section 17.03, which are the special land use review standards.
Do you want to do that section 1702M? It appears as though there's a number of changes.
Looks like you moved things around.
Or is that just...
A lot of it's just rearranging. Subsections M and N here. M just basically states that the Planning Commission may establish conditions of approval on any special land use, again, which is something you've done with every special land use that you've approved so far as I can recall. And item N enables the Planning Commission at their discretion or council to establish a performance guarantee. So for example, if there's something where you're concerned that it might not get finished, or there might be some sort of, it might create some sort of impact that would require the city to fix it or to take care of it, it enables the city to require a performance bond or a letter of credit or something like that to be submitted by the applicant that the city could then draw on to pay for some improvement if it were not completed by the applicant. So, and these are things that you do now. You have these abilities currently. You practice them. As far as conditions go, you do them all the time. Performance guarantees you do occasionally, I think. So it's, again, primarily it's sort of a thing to clarify the process, and again, it's just to enable you to continue to do something that you currently already can do.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it looks clear too, the way that you did it.
Right.
So in section 17.03, these are the special land use review standards. Whenever we review a special land use, we have these general standards in the ordinance, which are items 1 through 5, and the list here on page 4. In order to approve a special land use, the Planning Commission must find that all 5 of those standards are met. If you do find that all 5 standards are met, then you have to approve it. And again, typically when they are met, you approve it anyways. But I think it kind of helps with these special land use standards. It sets the bar a little bit higher because they're not considerations just for the site like we would ordinarily look at during a site plan review. These are a little bit harder standards, and they pertain to the actual activity that would be going on that property. I'm not proposing any changes to this section. It works, I think, in its current form, and so I'm comfortable with it there as you are. As you can see, these next 2 items, B and C, are the ones that I moved to the previous section, primarily for clarity. Moving ahead to page 5, the site design standards. These are all of the standards for specific special land uses that are permitted in some district or multiple districts in the city. So you'll see item A pertains only to country clubs, golf courses, riding stables, athletic grounds, and similar uses. I've not proposed any changes there. Item B, I've not proposed any changes that relates to greenhouses and nurseries and things like that. Except that number 7, and you'll see this a bunch, so I'll, I guess, talk to you about it now, where it says things like all lighting shall be shielded from adjacent residential areas. I deleted that standard not because I'm opposed to it, but because we already say that somewhere else in the ordinance. We have a whole section in chapter 4 that talks about lighting and how it shouldn't bleed onto adjacent property. So instead of restating it or stating it here but not stating it in a previous section, I just took it out so it's clear that it's not, we're not treating it any differently or any specially with regards to this use. It applies to everything already in chapter 4. And so I think it makes more sense to me to take it out and just, we can always apply the standards of chapter 4 with every special land use that comes across our desk.
And Andy, this is one of the major reasons why we are redoing all these ordinances, is to update and take out all those cross-references.
Yeah, I mean, I
clarify it.
Yeah, I think the cross-references are fine. The concern that I have with stuff like this is that if we say here in the subsection B, all lighting shall be shielded from adjacent residential areas, but we don't say it for subsection A, or we don't say it for subsection C, then it creates the impression that we're not requiring that for those other uses, when in fact we are. We just didn't specify it in the section for some reason. So it's kind of to me, it's kind of an all or nothing thing. We can put it in all of them, or we can put it in none of them. In this case, I chose none. If you're more comfortable with all, we can do that too, but I'd want it to be one or the other so that it's consistent.
Gentlemen, I would say none.
No, yeah, I like that.
Good, okay.
The other items in subsection B have not changed. It's just the renumbering of the subsequent sections. Subsection C, which is mining basically, you'll see there's quite a bit of red lines here. It's actually not as dramatic as it appears. A lot of it is, again, stuff that we're already doing, but I felt like for clarity's sake, it helps to sort of just label things a bit more clearly and make sure that we're asking for the right information. So under subsection 1, this deals with exceptions, times when you would not need a special land use to do some sort of mining activity. So I labeled it exceptions. Item 2 is application requirements. This one basically requires a bunch of information on top of what would be required for a simple site plan review. So like subsection A talks about access drive service roads and scrub pads. We don't ask for scrub pads for any other use because it doesn't apply to anything else. For mining operations it does, so we're going to specifically ask for that information on top of everything else. And that goes with everything else too. You know, structures, fixed equipment, setback lines, because they're different, we want to see those. Ponds, it would be creative, plan narratives that talk about the duration of the mining activity, how much material would be taken out, all of these kinds of things, the methods that they'll be using to do it, how they're going to control noise and dust, and how they're going to deal with waste, how they're going to deal with access, prevent trespassing, all of these things.
Andy, in that regard, under J3, we say the proposed routes for the township. I think that should be the
Yes,
same.
thank you, sorry.
Or should we, do we say Lowell, or do we say city?
City.
And is there a provision in here to repair roads if they destroy them through usage?
Typically, that is something that is covered with a performance guarantee.
Okay.
So the city could, in addition to a performance guarantee, if they were to walk away from the site and we have to restore the site, if they, we can, I believe anyways, that we can make them post a bond for the road as well, so that maintenance and things like that would be taken care of if there's damage to the road above and beyond what would normally be experienced due to the mining activity. That's something that would be, you could require them to post a bond to do that or take care of it that way.
But that would happen at the time.
Yes.
Okay.
The rest of them, again, this is it's just a laundry list of information above and beyond the normal site plan review stuff that we would ask for. Under subsection O, the one that's in green, that is something that's already in there. I just moved it from a different section because I thought it made more sense here. This basically just asks the applicant to let us know what the long-term plan is for the site, if there is one. In the city, typically, because you're fairly small geographically community, they're not going to, most of it, I would expect them to want to turn it into a housing development or build something there in the future, not just take out a bunch of dirt and then delete it. So I would expect it to be developed at the end of the mining activity. So we would want to know generally what they're thinking their long-term plan is for the site as part of that application. Number 3 is something on page 8 that I would want to call your attention to that talks about the Planning Commission determining whether or not the applicant is satisfied his or her burden in demonstrating that no very serious consequences would result from the extraction. This is something, these 6 standards here are standards that are, or considerations I guess, are considerations that are written into the Zoning Enabling Act. And so when we are reviewing a mining operation, these are things that we can consider. Otherwise, there are some limitations to how many conditions and how much authority we have to reject, if necessary, something like this. And so these 6 things are things where the applicant has to prove to the city that there are not going to be very serious consequences considering these things. So looking at how it's going to impact adjacent land uses in the vicinity, how it's going to impact property values in the vicinity, pedestrian traffic, traffic safety, things like that. Subsection 4 are the operational requirements for any kind of mining activity. So this actually deals with the sort of, a lot of it's just with the day-to-day operation and site design that we would want to consider and pay attention to. Again, most of the stuff, if it's not highlighted in red, is already in there. So as you can see, they're already pretty good standards to protect the city. In most cases here, the Planning Commission can establish a haul route for trucks, for example, under subsection F. Subsection 8.
I've got a question for A.
Yeah.
So in case there's a conflict, there can actually be a time where the local law will trump what the state law is.
Yeah, I mean, typically the most common state regulation that we're going to deal with in this case is probably going to be DEQ permits for a pond or something that deals with the river. But so to the extent that we can impose a more restricted regulation, we want that to control. There may be some instance where we are totally preempted, and that's fine, but
Yeah, that's my
otherwise.
only question, bringing me back to my first year of law school where, what trumps what.
Mhm.
And that was one concern that I had when I was reading this, that I don't know that that would always be the case.
Yeah, it's not always the case. There are some state regulations that I've run into over the years where they specifically allow zoning to impose a higher standard.
Mhm.
And so if that's the case, I would want that higher standard to control in that case. So let's see, continuing on here under item H, this is all new stuff talking about the operations not resulting in wind-blown sand, dust, or soil migrating off-site, collection of surface water onto adjoining lands, disturbance of trees and vegetation for a specific say, days or cell that is not used for ancillary drives, but they're just cut down trees and taking stuff out for no good reason. That's something that we don't want. Item 4, the failure to promptly reclaim any area. So if it's a phased, a lot of mining projects are phased where they have phase 1, 2, 3, 4. We want them to be finished with phase 1 and they're restored before we move on to phase 2. So they're working in a fairly logical, sequential manner and not disturbing a very large area at any one given time. And then the last couple things I added on page 10, subsection K, I said the Planning Commission may require an annual report. I have a lot of clients that do this where they'll just ask the applicant to come in and just sort of inform the Planning Commission how progress is going, how much has been taken out, how much longer they're going to be running, if they're still on schedule, so on and so forth.
And in that regard, is there any, at that point, is there any enforcement action that the city can take in case, when they make their report, there is something that comes up?
Yeah, I mean, typically, during those reviews is when, if there have been any complaints or anything like that received by the city in that previous year, we can usually address those with the applicant at that time and say, oh, by the way, you also need to address X, Y, and Z.
Or their permit is pulled.
Yeah, or we could, yeah, that's one of the routes that we could look at. It's not the only tool for the city to use to get everything into compliance, but it's one of them. So it's essentially an opportunity for the city to verify that they're doing what they said they're going to do. They're operating it completely in compliance with the ordinance. And if there is an instance where they're not, then we can address it at that time. Obviously, if it's a major issue, we can address it sooner if we need to. But that review is helpful at times just to keep everybody up to speed as to what's going on there. Because sometimes they often involve such a large area of land that no one goes back there. No one really knows what's going on very much unless there's a problem. So we'd like to obviously deal with it for that time.
Idle thought here, are there any such projects going on now that should be having annual reports, or do have annual reports that you're aware of?
Isn't there a mining operation in south of the river? I don't know if it's it might not be in the city, south of the Grand River, way on the southeast corner. Yeah, I don't know if that's still going or not.
I think that's just outside of town.
Okay, that would be the only one.
But they want to dig off of Grand River, or off of Post Road yet, didn't they?
I guess, I mean, Grand Rapids Gravel owns it, and it's been a couple of years now since I've heard anything from them. They had expressed interest a few years ago at doing some work there, and I've not heard anything since then in a long time, so I don't know what's going on there. They have a lot of irons in the fire, so they might be waiting, I don't know.
And is there anything to prevent them from like doing a 24-hour day operation?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the city has some rules as far as just, normal work with contractors and stuff as far as hours of operation go. And you can absolutely impose hours of operation on these things almost all of my clients impose hours of operation on them. You know, usually it's 8 to 5, 8 to 7, Monday through Friday, and half a day on Saturday or something, so it's not 24/7, 365 kind of thing. Are there further questions on that one, or Mr. Chair, do you want me to continue with the subsequent?
I'm fine, gentlemen.
So far?
Let's rock and roll.
Items D and E and F, I'm not really proposing any changes. I am adding this item, let's see, on a bunch of them that require them to submit to the city and
I have a question
permits
on,
they would need.
I have a question on these, sorry, Andy. What happens if somebody wants to put in a radio or television transmitting tower on top of an existing building here? I mean, the electronics keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller all the time. And it would seem as though that possibility, instead of putting up a tower, they may want to just do it on a building.
Yeah, and from a zoning perspective, if it's, I mean, I suppose if they would meet the dimensional requirements that we have now, they'd probably be able to do it from a zoning perspective. I don't know of anything that would prevent them from doing that now. If it,
Well, the question is, minimum
extend,
site size shall be 2 acres, and that may not apply to a building necessarily.
yeah, possibly. I don't know that we have any radio or television transmitting buildings or towers even in the city though at this point. And this is excluding cell towers. That wouldn't fall into this. I don't know if there are any others. I can't think of any.
Well, I'm just thinking,
I know.
you know, on top of King Milling, as
Yeah.
an example, I mean, they've certainly got some possibilities there
Right.
for the future, and you know,
Yeah.
we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the purpose behind, I'm guessing a little bit here, but the purpose behind the 2 acres is probably such that if someone wants to do this, there's an adequate fall zone on all sides, and it's not going to
Right.
fall onto it in adjacent property. But yeah, I mean, I suppose you could, I know you can, you know, design these things so that the fall zone would be less than the height of the tower as far as that radius goes. They can engineer them so that they're designed to crumple, you know, halfway up or something.
Okay, just curious.
Okay. Item F, I don't have any further changes. Under item,
I'm
sorry,
sorry.
go ahead.
Under F3, it says no such use shall be permitted on any property where there exists more than one other bed and breakfast within 750 feet, measured between the closest property lines. Why? What's wrong with having 2 bed and breakfasts side by side?
I don't know, I think presumably it's because, kind of like with short-term rentals, they don't want them typically concentrated in one area where we have a bunch of transient people coming and going many times. I'm guessing, I don't know why that's there. But that's probably the purpose of it. Some of these things can be viewed as, you know, intrusive to the tranquility of your neighborhood. I don't know if that's
I don't know.
legit or not.
I come from a place where they have them side by side, and it's never been a problem. So I just seemed like an odd thing to put in there.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the purpose of that was originally. So I was
typically the bed and breakfasts are in old houses that are rehabbed extensively.
Yeah, I mean,
they're usually in an area that basically wasn't very good because it was all 100-year-old houses. So I'm thinking that those houses would be close together instead of apart. So that's my question. Why would we put it in? Why would we want to discourage something?
I'm always for not limiting it beyond what seems to be necessary. It just doesn't seem like there's a great reason for it.
It just seems odd to me.
Would there be a history of when this was brought into the provision?
Who knows?
And, yeah, somebody put it there for a reason, but.
Yeah, we have all these giant houses. I mean, you could see how some of these ones in the neighborhood where, there's 2 next to each other, and actually they probably support each other's business by being next to each other.
That's exactly what happens down in South Haven. One got rehabbed, and then the other one said, "Oh, well, this is a no-brainer, so
Sure.
I'll throw $500,000 in to rehab it." And all of a sudden, you got 2 nice businesses. And they don't care because they're working off of each other.
Should be encouraged, yeah.
I would like to see that just taken out, at least for the time being.
I I agree.
If we have a problem with it, we can always put it back in.
Unless they find some other reason, yeah, I would like to take it out.
I mean, the only other reason I can think of is, I mean, practically this has an effect of limiting the overall number of B&Bs you would have in your city in total. So, to the extent that competes with a typical hotel type of use in the city's commercial district, whether it's downtown or elsewhere, I don't know. That could be a consideration, I suppose. But I honestly don't know why that was there in the first place.
Mike, do you see any problem with that?
No, I don't.
Let's go with it out for right now, and
Okay.
we can always, you know, when we have a public hearing, if there's a real objection, we can always readdress it. Thanks.
Subsection G, again, the first one is about lighting, so I took that out to be consistent. The new number 1, that starts with the word main building shall be set back, that's just me making the words so they're clearer, in my opinion. Under item H, I don't have any further changes, nor do I under item I.
Andy, one other quick question here before we get too terribly far. At the end of all of these, or most of these, starting with, what was it? Looks like I on the page before, on 3.10. We say applicants shall obtain and submit to the city all applicable local, state, and federal permits. But they're not on, consistently, they're not on all of them. They stop again at a different point.
Yeah,
I'm assuming there's reason for that, but I didn't understand the reason.
Reason is, so far as I know, there aren't any applicable federal permits for like a multifamily building or something. Maybe there is, and we should just put that on all of them. I'm not aware of any.
Or is this another case where we simply don't put it on any of them?
Could be. But we don't, they have to obtain all the other permits. We don't make them, the ordinance, I don't think anywhere else makes them submit a copy of that permit to the city. So that's why I included it in there. We could include that elsewhere in the chapter once instead of repeating it. That would, and that might be a little bit easier way to do it instead of being repetitive here, but that's the purpose.
Okay, gotcha.
Something like where applicable applicant, saying you can take care of it right at the very beginning.
Yeah, we can do that.
All right. Thank you.
Under item J, I've not proposed any changes for the daycare homes, although the one standard that caught my eye was this first one that talks about a minimum of 150 square feet of usable outdoor recreation area per client. I looked up the state standards for group daycare homes, and they require a total of 600 square feet within reasonable walking distance from the home for a group daycare, which is a 6 to 12 child facility that's in a home. So this the state allows you to use a park basically as that recreation area. So the standard here is higher than what would otherwise be permitted or allowed by the state. And then 150 per client. If it's a group daycare, you could have up to 12 clients. So that's, I don't know, what's 12 times 15? Whatever the math is what you would be required. I'm fine with leaving that standard in there. I'm just letting you know that it's a higher standard than what the state normally recommends. And if you're comfortable with that, we'll leave it in here.
The answer is 1,800.
Thank you.
Let's think about that. I'm fine with leaving it in, but let's just kind of put it on a radar screen to think about that. Also, one other real quick one back on the previous page 11 under G1, very end of the sentence there, from the nearest property line of any residential district. And then or use, do we need or use in there?
Yeah, because you might have a residential home that's in a commercial district or something.
Okay, thank you.
under item K, multiple family dwellings, you'll see that the last item, 5, is about the lighting, which I took out. Number 4, I thought that was an odd standard. It says the buildings cannot be closer together than a distance of equal to 1.5 times the height of the tallest building. Looking at some of them now, I'm pretty sure they don't meet that standard already, and I mean, to be honest, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We allow for all kinds of single-family homes and other tall buildings to be a lot closer together than that, so, you know, I didn't see why we would, you know, artificially put this very low-density type of pattern in here, so I propose that we take that out unless there are objections amongst the planning commission. Under campgrounds, I modified the language in number 3 on the top of page 13, just to be a little more, I guess, inclusive as to what that sort of central office can be. I mean, some campgrounds have got there's like it could be a convenience store or a gathering space or a recreational room or something, a variety of stuff. I don't want to limit it to any one specific thing, so I liberalized that language a little bit in subsection 3. Did not make any other changes there, nor did I make any changes to items M or N. Under subsection O on page...
In that particular thing, do you have anything that says it's in the city about the fire pits and burning? Do you have anything in there about regulations?
No,
if I didn't read it.
It's not typically something that we deal with. Are we talking about for a campground?
Yeah, if there was one to be in the city and we okayed it down the road, and would it fall under our ordinance for pits that we have with covers on it, or you just gonna let it be?
Yeah, probably. I don't know. I would think that the city's general burning ordinance would probably cover what they can do there, and if it would have to be covered and things like that. I don't know that we would specifically do something different from what's in your general law ordinance at this time. So, under subsection O on page 14, it talks about banks, credit unions, and so forth. It has a different setback for parking areas, and I propose we take that out and just let the general standards for parking lots control there instead of something different for that particular use. For hotels and motels, same thing. I took out the minimum lot area and width because, again, like in a mixed-use district or something, we could pretty easily see that happen on a parcel smaller than 4 acres. Same thing with number 1 and number 2 are addressed elsewhere in the ordinance to talk about access drives and parking areas, so I propose we take those out as well.
Do we even need to mention hotels and motels?
Well, that's a good question. Typically with a special land use, there's something peculiar about the use that requires additional regulation. Now we have no additional regulation, except that we do have a higher standard for approval still. So one of the things to think about moving forward, and maybe we'll have to look at this more carefully when we review each of the zoning district standards, is when we get to whatever district it is, I think it's C3, or maybe C2, that has a hotel or motel as a special land use, and say why? And what is it about a hotel that requires additional regulation in this district? And maybe it makes sense, but maybe it doesn't. That's a call I think we'll have to make down the line a little bit.
So we should leave it in here for the time being, at least the way it is. Just a hotel motel.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I would say leave.
It's not gonna hurt.
No, it's not going to hurt anything to leave it in here for now.
Okay.
Item Q, I don't have any significant changes here, although I don't know why I took out or use on number 1. That should stay in there, I think. On number 2, I made the requirement of a traffic impact study to be permissive, so instead of shall, it's may. The planning commission may require one. I think it kind of depends on what's being proposed and where and how frequently and things like that before we would automatically make them do that as a suggestion. Under subsection R, no changes. Subsection S for off-street parking lots. Again, numbers 3 and 4 I took out because I think they're covered sufficiently elsewhere in the ordinance already. Number 3, public access to the site shall be located. I'm just thinking we say as far as practicable instead of having a hard number of 50 feet in there, especially when we're talking about off-street parking lots downtown. I can very easily see an instance where we have to have a driveway that's within 50 feet of an intersection, but for whatever reason it can't be farther. Maybe it's the size of the parcel or the dimensions of it. And so to require a variance for something like that, it would be an automatic yes anyways. I think doesn't accomplish much, but we can get 50 feet or more in areas where there's space to do it. Subsection T for restaurants with drive-through, everything's the same except for the parking thing, which again is handled sufficiently elsewhere in the ordinance. No changes to subsection U or V. Subsection W for open air businesses, no changes except for number 5 where it talks about the surety bond. We put that at the front end of the ordinance, so I'm just suggesting that we take that out here. Under item X, retail building, again, just taking out the sentence about lighting, that's already addressed elsewhere in the ordinance. No other changes for subsection Y that deals with airports and heliports and stuff. Z and AA, no changes. Item BB for commercial wireless communication towers, primarily cell towers. We rewrote this section, if some of you recall, maybe 2 years ago. And so I think we're pretty comfortable with where that's at now. Have not proposed any further changes there, and that is something that has been made up to, been written up to the most recent standards of the Act, so far as I'm aware. And I didn't have any changes for towing service or brewery/winery. So that concludes the proposed changes at this time to the special land use standards.
Is that all of 17?
That is all of 17.
Commissioners, any further thoughts?
I have one on the very page 4. It says a proposed special land use shall be generally consistent with the City of Lowell's master plan. How often do we work on that master plan? So if this is today and we pull it out 5 years from now, what is that time frame that they stay
Hold that
consistent?
thought, because right after we finish this discussion, we're going to talk about that. So
Okay.
just hold that thought. We'll answer it.
Okay.
Good question. Any other discussion? Mike, as long as you're
I don't have anything to add.
okay. Let's write it up like we did for chapter 4. We'll get a clean version of it. And if you have any questions, you can highlight them in red with the questions, you know.
Okay.
And then hopefully we can finalize it at the May meeting.
This is the meeting.
Yeah.
Excuse me, the June meeting. Sorry about that. Lost a month there. In regards to your master plan question, Andy and I were having a discussion as we came in here. We are due for an update on the master plan this year. And my thought pattern here is that obviously it's a fairly good-sized document. What I would like to do is to take a look at it and give you at least a month. Right now, I'm thinking I will not be here for the July meeting. So it becomes a question whether or not you would prefer to do it maybe in August and go through it. I don't think I want to wait any longer than that, because we also have to do a public hearing on chapters 4 and 17, once we approve that. So I'm trying to save August maybe for doing that. And I think that might be the appropriate time to do it.
Does everyone have a copy of the master plan? I still have my old one, but I don't know what year that was yet.
I don't think it changed.
No, it was adopted in 2007. The act requires that a local unit review it every 5 years. That doesn't mean you have to change anything.
Right.
So 5 years ago, the planning commission looked at it and decided it was good and appropriate, and no further action was taken. And that very well may be what you guys decide this time too. But as you know, as a matter of our homework, we should look at it and make sure of that.
In lieu of these changes we're making, does that cover those in the same thing? So we're kind of as close as possible without, well, here's your master plan, here's what this is, which gets. So are they close to saying the same thing?
Generally, yeah. There are some areas of the plan, I think, when you look into some of the land use stuff, specifically, there are some design standards in there that we don't deal with a lot. I know you guys know that we do have some design standards for the mixed-use district, for example, that we included to talk about windows and build-to lines and things like that. There is some of that in there as well, but I think generally it's reasonably consistent with what you have in zoning.
And that's also consistent with what we talked about doing the zoning ordinances in chunks, both for our sanity and also for the city council's sanity, to make it a little bit more reasonable to look at. But at some point in time, we are going to have to say, when we do this, some of the zoning ordinances will not be totally up to date. An example would be definitions. That's probably the easiest.
Is there any cross-references between what Marty can do at his building because he's in a historical district that are covered in here, which you can and cannot do? But is that part of our master plan as well, or is that a whole different feel for that?
The master plan, it's not as specific as your zoning is. So your zoning has your setbacks and building heights and very specific land uses for each district. The master plan is typically more general than that. We like to say that your master plan is a blueprint. It's kind of general, well, not generally, but it says where things should go and how it should be built. And the zoning ordinance is one of many tools in your toolbox that you would use to actually build what's on the blueprint. So that's how you implement the plan, is by using zoning and other tools. And whether those other tools are other ordinances, historic district, historic preservation ordinance and commission is a great example of that. The Parks Commission and Parks Planning is another example of that. To answer your question, if we're talking about what you can do in each specific on a parcel or in a future land use designation, typically they're written in a fairly general sense, like this area or this neighborhood or property within this low-density residential designation is typically characterized by single-family homes on, lots about X size, sidewalks, so on and so forth. It's usually not going to be terribly specific as far as what can and cannot go on there. With, again, it will say, usually it will say things about you not wanting heavy industrial use in the middle of a neighborhood or something like that, but we have we have the mixed use district, which doesn't talk a whole lot about land use in the master plan. It talks more about how the area should be built and designed, what the buildings should look like, how they should feel, where they should be situated, but it's pretty open as far as the actual use of the property goes.
Thanks, Andy. The question I guess I have is, or what I'm looking at here, scheduling wise, is to finalize chapter 17 and 4 in June and set a public hearing sometime probably in August would be my guess. And that public hearing, I think we would be better served not having it during our regular meeting. And I would like to have the regular meeting in August be for a review of our master plan. which would give us a couple of months to look over it. Because I'm thinking at this point, we may not have a meeting in July. Depending on, what comes up and comes in, obviously, but that would be kind of my preference. I'm also going to ask Andy, there are some zoning chapters that are not the districts. There's like, the 10 or 12 chapters for the districts, whatever that number is. But then there are some odd chapters too beyond that we have not looked at. And I would ask Andy to possibly take a look at that and see if there are some that we could pick off and include with chapters 4 and 17, maybe at a public hearing, or do all of them at once. And if that's possible, then we can cover that at whatever, maybe at the June meeting, or at least have the list at the June meeting. If we can cover it, we will. And then set up the open public hearing for the chapters 4 and whatever else we can tack on. Because that will clear that up.
Because I don't know if we have a meeting in July, how do we get it, June, how do we get it approved before August, so that we can have open meetings? So it looks like 4 and 17 will be the two.
For sure,
really
and if there are a couple of chapters that literally are no more than a paragraph, and if there's no changes, then we can include them, and if not, then we move on, but at least we're moving in the right direction.
I agree.
And I think that makes a little more sense. Which leaves us for the master plan in August, and then we would resume the districts in September. Because it would be nice, well, I guess depending upon the master plan review, but at least kind of plan on the districts in September, and that gives you a time frame, Andy, where you can go through. Fair enough for you?
Sounds good.
That makes sense to everybody? And I would propose at this point to kind of not have a meeting in July, but plan on having 2 in August. I really would prefer not doing a public hearing on the zoning ordinances during our regular meeting. I just think that it could be very time consuming. And I don't think that's fair to the public. I just don't think it's fair to us. So I'd rather keep us pretty focused on that, because it's a major.
So we'll have a special meeting just for chapters
4 and 17 and whatever else. That'd be the only thing on it, and then we will have the public hearing. We will then take our vote to make a recommendation to the city council, and then it's up to them what they want to do. It's their pleasure. So at least I think it keeps it, and it keeps the city up to date for us too. Fair enough?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Mike.
I'd like to add, I'm not so sure that's needed to have the second meeting. In talking with Susie, we tend to do these at our normal board meetings. One is our normal practice. We do these at normal meetings, but my concern is that we're not going to really have anything major where we're going to have a public hearing where we have public hearings all the time where no one speaks on it.
Right.
And I'm not so sure that's needed. I mean, the information is going to be given out to them ahead of time. For example, like with our budget, we're going to be having our public hearing next Monday night.
Right.
The budget's out.
Right.
And we had a budget session on Saturday that nobody came to. And I'm not so sure that's needed to have 2 meetings to do this. I tend to think you could probably do it in 1 meeting and address the other issues.
Well, except for I'd rather not do a July meeting.
That's fine.
And at the August meeting, I want to do the master plan.
Okay.
So to have the master plan and that on the same schedule, I don't feel comfortable with that at all.
Okay.
I mean, myself, I don't.
Okay.
Be a long day.
It could be a horribly long day, and if we get involved with the ordinances at any length, I think it could be really bad. So that's my thought.
That's fine.
The other thing is we could have the 1 meeting. If we find out it's dragging, we can always postpone the agenda until the following month.
Exactly.
You might find out it might be only a 15-minute thing and then we're done.
Right.
Or if it is,
right.
go back into
Right.
September.
And that way too, we can get the meeting, or get the zoning ordinances to the city council and let them do their thing.
Right, so they can.
So we're not holding them back.
Right.
And September sure is better than October. I mean,
Yep.
it's, just seems like it's better all the way around. Okay, thank you.
So we're gonna go with the one meeting and then we'll see how it plays out with the agenda?
I want to have 2 meetings in August. I'm still for 2 meetings in August at this point. I can be sold, but it's going to be expensive. It's going to be expensive. No, I just think from a time standpoint, I think
Yeah.
we're better served.
Well, I don't think we'll be able to catch the whole city thing in one meeting, and
Right.
I mean, that's a lot to go through, so again, it might be
Well, yeah.
over a couple of meetings where we
And
actually.
the master plan could be
Master plan,
really-
that's what I'm saying, the master
Yeah.
plan itself.
Exactly. I mean, that,
Within
exactly.
1 hour.
So we'll plan on our normal August date will be our normal meeting where we'll consider the master plan. And then we'll set a date for the zoning ordinances, the public meetings there. We'll set that in June, at our June meeting. So everybody will know when those are going on. Okay? It'll be an August meeting, but we'll set it in June. So everybody's got their notice. Thank you. Now, review of 2017 goals and priorities. And again, I think we talked about some of those just now. The master plan and review of maximum building height and the setbacks and things of those are all things that are upcoming. We still got them on our schedule, so I think we're okay there. Residential zoning districts, lot cover, all of that stuff is all upcoming, basically.
Yeah, items, I guess it'd be 2 through 5 could all be handled when we look at the individual district regulations, when we get to that point.
Right.
I mean, each district has setbacks, building height, and lot coverage within that language. So that would all be reviewed kind of as we look at overall every district.
Okay. And then 6.
6 and 8 would be something that we deal with if we were to open up the parking chapter. So the question with number 6 is, a few years ago, we and the DDA did a parking study and looked at actual amount of parking compared to what's required by the ordinance versus what the actual demand typically is for those kinds of uses. And we divided up the city into different, primarily downtown. We divided up the downtown into these different districts to see if any areas were underserved or overserved with parking. And so this number 6 is one of the discussion points that came out of that is there a different way that we can formulate parking requirements instead of saying 1 space per 300 square feet of building or 500 square feet of building. Maybe there's something where we can look at an area of population or some other similar activity-based standard for a certain area to determine how much parking is needed. And basically the overall point of it would be to have parking used as efficiently as possible. So you have, you're encouraging turnover, you're encouraging in areas like downtown where there's multiple types of land uses going on, you have overlap for peak hours. So like a peak hour for a home is going to be different from a peak hour from a restaurant, which would be different from peak hours for a bank, for example. It's all different. And so theoretically, you could serve all of those things with a greatly reduced number of parking spaces because you're not going to have them, you know, the lot's going to be full all the time, but it's going to be full of people there for different reasons. And so that's kind of the overall point of it, is to just encourage more efficient parking calculation and arrangement. And along those same lines, item 8 was a question that was asked couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, about what do we consider hard surface for a parking lot. In the zoning ordinance, it says that a parking lot shall be asphalt or concrete or some other hard surface to be approved by the planning commission. The question is, well, what does that mean? Does that mean gravel? Does that mean crushed asphalt or crushed concrete or something else that's not been determined yet? We don't know. And so one of the thoughts was that maybe the planning commission should look at determining with a little more specificity what other sorts of hard surfaces could be acceptable for off-street parking lots. So 6 and 8 would be parking related.
And again, both of those are, or have been done in the past with DDA input?
We did a plan, well, not a plan, we did a study basically. We didn't formulate any policy or write any regulations based on that. It was just a report and a study that we did last year, 2 years ago, that looked at that. So it was right, I think it was finished right before the South Federal law went in. So it was about a year ago, year and a half, something like that.
I guess I would look at direction from you and Mike on that particular parking spaces, DDA, on both 6 and 8. And obviously 7 is what we're doing now.
Right. So yeah, 6 and 8, I mean, obviously we're probably not going to get everything on this list done this year. But you know, as long as there's some priorities as far as what we want to tackle first, which I think there is, you know, maybe the parking is something that we dig into in
2018. Staff, anything at all?
Nothing further to report.
Than what you already gave us? Thank you. Andy, anything? Okay. Commissioners?
We're good.
In our last meeting, we had some local residents come up and talk, and then part of it, and I had a conversation with a couple of them afterwards, and even though they had good points, there was nothing that I personally thought would change my mind in the vote, and yet I thought it was great input to consider, but I believe, I don't know what I wasn't at the city council, so I know city council maybe could have enforced or made some changes to what we did, so I'm not sure what that outcome was that day, but I did have several conversations, and I told them, based on what you guys presented, there was nothing that really we could do to not vote for it.
Right.
So, just FYI.
And I am too, so with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll support.
And all in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
We stand adjourned.